Mondays with Mark Allen. Welcome back, everybody. Today, this is a different format. As you can see, there's two of us here. This is Michael Marckx. He's been around endurance sports for decades now, all the way from back in the days of working with Gatorade at Ironman to most recently, probably a lot of you might know him from the Belgian Waffle Ride, which if you haven't heard anything about it, Michael's going to talk about it. So Michael, welcome. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about the Belgian Waffle Ride? It's a pretty it's an amazing event. My son did it actually a couple of years ago, and I can tell some stories from that. But I'll let you lead off with that.
So my family's Belgian, and my dad was always proud of our Flemish heritage. And our family is actually Marckx, not Marx. They changed it when my great-grandfather immigrated. So I always had this love of cycling. My parents were cyclists. We were also marathoners. So all six of us were marathoners. I ran my first marathon when I was 12, which is not bragging because my brothers did it when they were 8 and 9. My parents also were avid cyclists. So age 12, I did my first bike race. Same year I did my first marathon. And that special race bike of mine, the Schwinn Varsity, you may recall that. I utilized that in the dirt because there was a shortcut to get to my school, and one morning I was late. So I didn't know what to do. So I jumped on the trail that is much faster to get there. That's how we would walk there, but you'd never take a race bike on that trail. And I remember blazing by a couple of the 8th graders who said, and these were the bully types, "You can't ride that bike in the dirt." And away I went, and I was not late. And that was my beginning love affair with riding a race bike in the dirt. More recently, I was hired to turn around that eyewear company called Spy Optic, if you remember.
Oh, yeah.
That was 2011. So by 2012, I decided to start this race that took into the things that I loved, which is Belgian waffles, Belgian ale, a very long bike race, you know, a la Paris-Roubaix. And at the time, I also had a UCI Pro card to race cyclocross. So I thought, let's combine all those things into a wonderful cocktail, and it'll be a 7-hour cyclocross race. And we do it on 23 millimeter tires, which eventually migrated to 25. Now people use 40 and 44, and it boggles my mind that they want to spend that much time on these wide tires. But that first year I invited 136 people, many of who you know. 188 of them finished, and each year I made it more dirty, longer, more challenging, and then people came from all over, and it's grown into apparently the largest gravel race in the US with over 4,000 racers. I've tried to evolve the course every year to give it more dirt, more challenging terrain, rocks, sand. I'm sure your son shared with you some of the stuff, the water crossings and all of that. And now we're doing them, there's 4 of them. So this year's the quadruple crown of gravel: San Diego, North Carolina, Cedar City in Utah, and then Kansas. Looks like we're also going to add one in Michigan later this year, one in Mexico, and then we're adding Canada in 2023. So that's a snapshot of how we got here today.
That's amazing. How much more is on gravel now than when you first started that, like in that first year?
Great question. It was kind of minimal gravel. I would find like little sneaky ways of connecting roads that were gravel, and it was more of a novelty. There's certain roads in San Diego that you can find that are gravel, which are neat, but now there's so much more. It's 40 some odd percent this year. Right around 40% is going to be gravel. So pretty significant. Whereas Kansas is like 93% gravel. Cedar City is 89% or something like that. And I think that North Carolina is probably 56 or 60% gravel.
Wow. And when you first started it, you know, you had this idea like, hey, I want to do something that's like a spring classic event, but I want it to be different. Was it sort of like, if I build it, they will come kind of an idea, or you had no idea, or did you think, or had you been talking around with people and going, hey, everybody's going, I think that would be very cool to do?
Yeah, like many things in life, it's a confluence of things that can make them sink or swim.
Mm,
And I kind of reaped the benefit of lots of people were gravitating to cyclocross. They didn't want to mix it up with cars anymore. USA Cycling was struggling to capture the imagination of riders because they basically, you remember those crit races around a parking lot, it's just not very sexy.
yeah.
Um, there was a massive cyclocross scene at the time. So I knew that there was, some appetite for such a thing. Um, and but it was a selfish thing. It was like, I want to do this. I love it. Tell my friends that they have to do it. And then eventually they'd tell two friends and so on and so forth. And at the same time, this idea of gravel sort of coalesced in the general cultural zeitgeist because people were migrating from riding the bike. It was adventure, it was like cross country running. It's just, there's something really cool about it. So all of those things worked in our favor, and that's why we're here today.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are just, the reality is it's dangerous out on the roads. There's a lot of accidents, a lot of people losing their lives. That's not a fun way to go out on the ride thinking, gee, am I going to make it back safely? And obviously on gravel, you're not dealing with those same kind of things. And, like if I think back on the days of Ironman when in the early 80s, it sort of seems similar to this in the sense that it's so much of it is the adventure part. It's not, so like you can go hard, you can compete, but it's really an adventure. It's sort of like that thing, like, can I do it? Can I can I finish that thing? My son did it, I don't know, it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and his main goal was to cross the finish line in one piece. And throughout the day, he did the one in San Diego.
Yep.
And he got more flats than he could fix, and his bike pump broke. But the cool thing is that in the middle of the race, the other riders stopped and helped him out. They wanted to see him finish just as much as he wanted to see himself finish. And he was, at certain points where the sand got really thick and some of the top riders went down and were either the bikes broke or something broke on them, and they were out of the race. He went pretty conservative and fell a bunch, but didn't really get hurt. And he said it was one of the most beautiful rides he's ever done. And, if you're obviously used to riding on the roads, there's some beautiful places in the US and Europe, but you don't get to go through mountains the same way you do on gravel. And it seems like that's probably another, like the huge benefit or the huge side thing that people are like, wow, this is really cool.
Yep. That's it.
Yeah. Um, you were talking about the size of the tires, those, 36, 38 millimeter. That's
Yeah.
that's twice as wide as what I was riding when I was racing in Kona. It was like 21, 19. How narrow can you go? That was the whole thing
Yeah.
we were doing back then.
Yeah. Same here. We were always trying to, 18 on the front if we could, and super skinny on the back. And then we realized that rolling resistance actually favors about 24 and a half. But they keep evolving the technology and tire widths, wheel widths, and what they can accommodate. And people are finding more comfort and more speed in, 26, 28 millimeter tires. I think this year's BWR, probably a 32 millimeter tire, is what most people will run, but certainly some people will run 40s. And every year I've always done it, whether in the race or solo a couple days before, on 25s. And this year I will again do it solo on 25 millimeter tires, just to say to people on the start line, you can do it on anything.
Mm. Well, you have a little bit of skill on the bike that probably the average guy doesn't have, but that's a great message to put out there. How does it feel to kind of be like the guy that really you were seeing into the future with this concept? Like USA Triathlon just announced a Gravel triathlon series.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
It is. I don't know. For me, it's just something that was so natural from my upbringing and what I did and what my parents shared with us. And I grew up running cross country. I ran the Catalina Marathon when I was 15 and a few other times. And I always loved the romance of being on those trails with the Buffaloes and the Buffalo Bills and um, other people in the world that enjoyed that kind of camaraderie out there in nature. And so I'm just sort of replicating those things that I fancied as a kid and putting them into an adult format that is bracketed by lots of waffles and then lots of beer at the end.
What a combo! A waffle. I'll have a waffle and a beer. Probably
Yeah,
both
it's a
sound
good
pretty darn good.
combo.
And I'm sure at the end of a Belgian Waffle Ride, that sounds pretty darn good. That's
Yeah.
great. I'd like to just go back a couple years. You gave a TED talk, and
Oh yeah.
and in that talk, you sort of recounted a number of things, but one of them was the way that you ended up meeting Scott Zagarino, who is the CEO of Mark+Allen Sports, and somebody that I have known and worked with for years, somebody that you have known and worked with for years. Maybe you can give us a little snapshot of that incredible story.
Yeah, I'd love to. I love Scott. And one of the most important things to ever happen to me, not so much the psychic, but that certainly underscored the wisdom that I would cling to the rest of my life. Mm. I was a triathlete and won we were in the same race at Desert Princess. Do you remember the year that you had the issues with the tire?
Mm-hmm.
I was in that race and had flatted, but still got back up and chased, and I ended up finishing in front of you. So I remember when they announced, I came, you came running in and around through into the Desert Princess, and they, over the loudspeaker, they say, hey, here's the new amateur world champion, Michael Marckx. And there was like, I think my parents clapped and a couple of other people. And then not too many seconds later, and here comes Mark+Allen, and the whole place erupted. And I waited for you at the finish and high-fived you, and you were flustered from your experience out there that day. But anyway, with Scott, I had been racing and I had turned pro, and then I got hit by a car. Mm-hmm. So I went to go work in the warehouse at Edgeware. If you remember that brand, we had Brad Kearns and Andrew McNaughton and Lance Armstrong and a couple of other guys, and I raced on that team with them. I couldn't race because I had like 18 months of rehab. So I went into the warehouse, and that's where I met Scott. And eventually in my comeback, we raced on the team with Scott, Triathletes for Kids. Mm-hmm. And that was my initial connection with Scott. And then maybe a year later, I was still working in that warehouse, and my family was, kind of worried about me. I went from racing my bike and recently graduating from college to working in a warehouse, and maybe I wasn't all that happy. My sister bought me a visit to a psychic, 90 minutes with a psychic. And I was like, sure, I'll go. So I went to visit the psychic, and she was amazing. And from the get-go, before the session even started, she welcomed me at the door, this beautiful presence. And she said, listen, I want you to know before we get going, I know your dad is very sick, but he's going to be okay. He's going to live. And my dad's still alive today at 87. But at the time, he was very sick. But there's no way she could have Googled me and figured this out, because Al Gore hadn't invented the internet yet. So there was just no chance of it. This was 1988 or 89. All these amazing things happened with this visit, and most of them were terrible. Like, she's saying, look, I know you're an athlete, but you're never going to achieve the type of athletic success that you already have. And then she was like, oh, and tell me, you're a drummer. And she did this with her hands. She goes, you're in 2 bands. And I'm like, how do you know this stuff? And she's like, well, I'm a psychic. That's what I do. And then she goes, tell me about the band with the big heart. And she does this. And that band's name was More Love Now. So, of course, she was like that. And that band went on to great success without me. And she was right. She predicted that. She said they're going to have an incredible career, which they do now. And basically, they're called Calexico. If the folks at want to look up Calexico, they're an amazing band. And then she said, she went into the other band. She said, you have to quit that band. That's not going to go anywhere. And we had just been like signed to Atlantic Records. And I didn't understand it, but she was right. Like the whole thing was predicated on some bad juju and all this bad news. And then at the end, she said, I know that I haven't told you what you wanted to hear, but you're going to be tremendously successful in business. And I was like, business? That's what my dad does. I'm either going to be a musician or an athlete or both. And she was apologetic, but she said no. And then she said, oh, before you go, tomorrow, you're going to get a job offer, which you must take. And there's going to be a guy, his hair's going to be down to here, dark hair, his name begins with an S. He's going to call you and offer you a job. You must take it. And lo and behold, the whole day went by, no call from this mysterious long-haired stranger with a name that begins with an S. Until the very end of the day, Scott Zagarino called me and said, hey, CS Sports just was hired by Gatorade to run their activations and to run the Hawaiian Ironman. And he said, I want you to come work with me. And I said, well, you wouldn't believe what happened yesterday. And that changed my life. Scott's offer changed my life, and the psychic urging me to take that job changed my life. And basically the takeaway was, sometimes it doesn't always work out the way we want, but if we continue to do the things that we love and cherish and that give us meaning, and we bring positivity into the world through those mechanisms and through those avenues, then we should keep doing that because it will work out. And that was my takeaway from the psychic experience. And Scott proved it to me in spades that that's what I needed to do. And I've never looked back because it's been fantastic.
And that's been kind of like a guiding principle for you, it sounds like.
Forever.
Then.
Yeah. I've never, because she told me it was all going to work out. First of all, she said my dad was going to live. She said these bands weren't going to work out. Everything that she said came to fruition. She said, you will never have to worry because you're going to be successful at business, which I didn't care about. But now I have this safety net underneath me, which has enabled me to be a bit more adventurous and creative with the businesses that I run and the things that I do, because I always feel like I know I'm doing this for the right reason and I know it's the right thing to do. And if I fail, so what? The safety net is there. And then that enables you to maybe reach a little higher than you would, aspire a bit more. And in that aspiration, great things can happen.
I know that, personally in my life, the more things that I do like that, where I have followed what I feel is the right thing to do, and I've seen how that has turned out compared to the other things, it gives me more confidence to keep living that way. What would you say to somebody they're right at that tipping point where they're just now realizing, wait a minute, I need to do what's important for me, but I just don't know if it can work out, or maybe they've started down that path, but things are stumbling. What would you say to that person they haven't had that experience yet, but they're trying?
Usually there's two answers to that, because I teach it a lot, and I get students that ask me that because they're on the precipice of entering the work world, if you will. And one is, listen, keep doing what you're doing that's practical, but make sure you give time to that which is the aspirational. What do you really want? So maybe you're in this job that's paying you money now, and you're a little bit afraid to leap into the unknown with your passions. Then wade into it. Do not give up on it. Find ways to infuse your life with that activity or that pursuit, and let it complement and ultimately take over all of your psychic energy. Or in some people, I just say, look, you need to quit this thing that's creating too much toxicity in your life and pursue that which you really love. And it will work out. It might be hard at the beginning, and there might be people that tell you, don't do it. That, are you crazy? You know, you can't make that happen. And you can. I've had so many people tell me over the years, you'll never be a runner because I was asthmatic. You'll never be able to do this. No one's going to want to do that race. You're never going to get them to approve that. You're never going to turn around that company, and you can do all of it. So usually there's those two things, there's two different type of people. But always the answer is do not give up.
Mm. You know, you've had so much success in your life on a business level, but ultimately it feels like, from what I'm hearing from you, is that it's not about the money. It's about doing something that's fulfilling, that isn't necessarily an end goal. It's like this, that's the journey of getting there. That's the fulfilling part, and that makes it worth it.
My younger self wanted to make money, to have a car and a house and this ideal lifestyle that had been inculcated into me. And then once I arrived there, I was like, this doesn't feel good. This mortgage feels bad. I don't need the fancy car. It doesn't make me taller or smarter or happier. And when we moved back to Encinitas after moving to LA to turn around a company up there, we downsized into a really small house for 4 of us and got rid of all the clutter. And we just had surfboards and bicycles and drums and soccer balls, and a much happier life that was uncluttered, unfettered by things and mortgages. And it allowed me to be more creative with my time with the kids, as well as the business that I had been hired to turn around. At the time, I was also the chairman of the board of the Surf Rider Foundation. So I would travel periodically in pursuit of, fighting for clean oceans, beaches, and waves. And that fight always felt better. I didn't make any money doing that, but the people I would meet, the things that I would learn, and the victories that collectively we achieved always felt better than the bonus or the salary increase or whatever those other things were. So fortunately, I learned that the things that make us feel most joy and most fulfilled really aren't tethered to money. They're tethered to being in service to others and doing good work.
Living a life of purpose.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm sure you know this from the world of surfing, but the hardest part about surfing is actually just the takeoff and getting going down the line, you know, and for me, it's such a metaphor for life, in that if you're paddling and you're going to take off, and you're either going to go left or you're going to go right. You don't go straight on a wave. But when you're paddling, your board is actually kind of going straight. And if you take off looking straight, you get to the bottom, all of a sudden it's really hard to get the momentum going down the line. Whereas as you're taking off, if you're looking where you want to end up, the second you get to your feet, everything just follows right in line. And I reflect on that so many times, because it can be very easy. I know personally, when the challenges come up and things don't seem like they're going the way that I hope in some aspect of my life, I see the direction I'm going as opposed to the direction I want to end up at. And
yeah, that goes back to your earlier question about young people or people that are grappling with a crossroad, is keep looking where you want to go. They would teach us, and by the way, I used to see you out at Swami's periodically when we were both younger. But they used to teach us in bike racing too. Look where you want to crash. Don't look at the fire hydrant, look at the grassy knoll. And that metaphor of visualizing where you want to end up works in all aspects of life. Keep looking where you want to go. Don't look behind. Don't look at the jeopardy. Look down the line. That's where you're headed.
What a great lesson.
Yep.
What would you say for folks to bring it back to the whole idea of gravel, what would you say to somebody who's never tried a gravel race before?
You are missing out on adventure.
Mm.
And adventure is both what the trail avails to you, in terms of where it takes you. Like some of the trails that we use in the BWR, most people never end up there. They're remote. There's no coverage. There's maybe a few mountain lions out there with you. There's not much. So there's the adventure. There's also the adventure of being in that moment and in a state of flow, much as we are when we're driving down the line at Swami's. We're not thinking about, oh, I'm going to be late, or I got to get my hair cut, or, whatever our boss, was bothering us about. Those things disappear. Same with when you're in the moment and in the state of flow with gravel. You're forced to look at every line and every rock and figure out ways to get through the next 100 yards, let alone the next 100 miles. So it's each one of these immersions and these challenges in front of you that is enriching, enlivening, enthralling. I'm looking for another E word, exciting, and entertaining, and oftentimes edifying too, right? We learn from that. The first few times you venture out into gravel on your road bike or a bike, you realize it's easy to slip. It's easy to get a pinch flat. It's easy to mess up. But over time, you gain a certain sense of standing and stability within that environment, and then it becomes second nature. So then what's the next challenge? Once that's second nature, you can layer on another challenge and another challenge. It might be climbing. You got to stay seated in your climbing when you're in the dirt. And all of these things start to layer on top of each other. And a year later, you're a totally different person, at least in terms of your relationship with the environment.
Wow, that's amazing. Kind of like that freedom that you can only get when you're just in the moment.
Yeah, that's when we're experiencing the most joy, in a state of flow.
Well, Belgian Waffle Ride, you have a lot of time to be in that state of flow.
Yeah.
Be in that state of enjoyment. You have 4 races this year, is that right? Is that what you said?
Yeah, there's the quadruple crown of gravel, and then we're going to add one in Michigan in August, Mexico in November, and then I mentioned Canada for 2023. So a lot of different options.
Great. Well, you've heard it from the king himself here, Michael Marckx. Thank you for all that you've done for sport and all that you've done to help people find adventure and maybe find a different part of themselves, and so many words of wisdom that ultimately shows us that sport can be something that teaches us about life and helps us to live a better life, not only just from our physical health, but all those lessons that are learned and that transformation that can take place, especially out there in nature. What an amazing gift. Thank you for doing that, Michael.
Well, thank you for inspiring me the last 35 years. It's been that long since I met you. And everything you've done has been inspirational to me, and I appreciate it very much.
Great. Mondays with Mark Allen, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this. I loved this conversation, and stay tuned. We'll see you next week. Take care.